What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. I think there's something that we must discuss, which is a case of console elitism. Some console players are elitist. It's weird because from what I've been seeing talking about PC and the changing landscape and how, we're seeing a very dynamic shift, I see some comments that make me scratch my head in a weird way. I'll show you a thread of one of them, and it's very interesting. So I made this video where I talked about how with these PlayStation games, Xbox games, I think I made two of them. You can actually play them with hardware that is less powerful than the Series X and the PlayStation 5. For instance, Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, it's requiring for its minimum or its recommended requirements a GTX 1060 and an i5 4670. This is hardware that the PlayStation 5 is actually more powerful than. Or in terms of even the minimum requirements, it's an i3 4160 and a GTX 950. These parts are basically a dime a dozen these days. You can pay $50 for a 1060 6 gigs. You can pay about $30 to $40 for one of these CPUs, and you're good to go. I made that video and I got some really interesting comments on a thread, and I thought I need to show this to you guys. When I made that video and talked about the different games, I also showcased Ghost of Tsushima, also requiring very minimal hardware. Now, I think that may have been something that kind of triggered this conversation in a sense, because the Ghost of Tsushima, its requirements was quite interesting, because when you actually consider it, because it was a PS4 game when it came out, it really did not need a lot of hardware in terms of the PC side. For 60 FPS, yes, it was asking for an RTX 2060 probably to get you that 60 FPS, but its minimum requirements was like a GTX 960, a very cheap device. So this person said, Tsushima is a PS4 game. You realize that. I know that. I beat it on PS4. And using the minimum requirements, really? What else am I supposed to use? It's a video on the minimum requirements. Want to play a game that beautiful on low? I played it on the PS4. It was a beautiful game. I enjoyed every moment of it. The recommended specs are a 2060. Yes, but the minimum specs are also designated for those who may have a PC that is in that range, or to inform people who may have below the recommended specs so that they're also informed that they're not left out. That's what minimum and recommended specs are required to do by the developers. If you didn't know that, I'm just trying to let you know that this is how it has always been before, a lot of people started getting wind of what this was. When they give you the minimum requirements, they're saying, hey man, if you have hardware that meets this, it's not even the exact, it could be any hardware that meets this, you're fine. Or if you have it maybe slightly more and it's not at the recommended, you're still fine. And if you have it at the recommended, it's a benchmark so that you're good. That's what minimum and recommended specs are for PC games. Now, they said, and you will get less performance, and you'll get less performance than what the PS5 version of the game, while spending more on a below-mid PC. How is that possible? It's a $50 GPU. It's a $50 CPU. By the time you're done, you are going to be spending way less. Or, if you're, in a sense, much more savvy with your money, you can buy new hardware and build a PC that's actually better than a PS5 for close to the PS5 cost. That's a whole different video. I've made that video like 50 times. And so they said this on the only PS5 game, like Spider-Man 2, the minimum requirement is predicted to on a benchmark of the 3080. What happened to the $50 GPU? Yo, a lot of what this person is saying makes no sense. Number one, we have never had a problem with 30 FPS games. I beat Ghost of Tsushima when my best PC build at the time was a 1080 Ti. Ghost of Tsushima was on my PS4 and I played it and I enjoyed it a lot. I didn't care if it was 30 FPS. I just was so immersed in such a nice, wonderfully made game. Sure, at 60 FPS I'd have had a much enhanced experience, but that's never been a problem. I think what we're seeing is a lot of folk here, because they've somehow been able to access 60 FPS, they basically look down on anything else that is not meeting that requirement, and they forget that some of the best games that we played were 30 FPS games. And this statement of the PS5 game like Spider-Man 2 has the minimum requirements to predicted on a PC benchmark to be a 3080? A 3080 is a much more powerful GPU than the 6700 equivalent non-XT in the PS5. How can Spider-Man run on that kind of hardware, Spider-Man 2, and how can you predict what we haven't seen yet from the developers themselves, and yet at the same time, you still are criticizing minimum requirements? You see this? They said, and using the minimum requirements, really? While coming here to say that the minimum requirements of the PS5 game is predicted to be on a benchmark of the 3080. Man, I was shocked. I replied and said, so PlayStation and Nixxes are not going to make that same mistake. They will never make a sequel to a PC game with a hardware requirement that is out of the reach of the targeted consumer. I made this statement simply just to highlight the fact that this is coming from a place where I think a lot of people don't even realize the ramifications of what they're saying. If you look at the Steam hardware survey, this is how you actually read that data, because, this data actually is a money maker. If you're going to make this particular kind of argument, you really need to know exactly what the argument, and the ramifications thereof are. The Steam hardware survey is one that guides developers on how to make their games. I'm an indie developer myself working on my own video game. This is exactly where I'm going to come to actually start optimizing the PC version of the game that we're making. I'm literally going to look at this hardware and say, okay, OS version Windows 10. I'm going to go get my Windows 10 keys, reinstall Windows 10 on a fresh build so that I can actually test the game running on Windows 10. I'm going to put 16 gigs of RAM. I'm going to put a CPU that is within this frequency range. I'm going to look for, say, other CPUs to try to test what's going on. I'm going to try to find an RTX 3060 or the second highest, which is the GTX 1650. If you notice, 6% use the 3060, 4.38% are on the 1650, and a little more on the higher range. But I know if we can get the optimization down for the game with these two bad boys here, maybe even a 1060, which is still used by 3.46%. That's exactly why you're seeing the PlayStation games still targeting the 1060. We can gain access to the larger number and majority of people who play their games on PC. This is exactly why this data is here, and this is exactly how this data translates. So if somehow PlayStation decides they're going to go and make a game where its minimum requirements is the 3080, they're going to isolate a huge chunk of their player base and basically narrow it down to somewhere around the 2.28% all the way up to higher graphics cards and eliminate all the other people who are beneath those graphic card usage. Do you see how this does not necessarily help this conversation? Because I think some people just want to talk. This is really weird. And then they came around and I said, okay, if you're talking about a PS5 game, then how about Ratchet and Clank? How about Returnal? Those games were PS5 games. And if you look at, say, even their hardware on here, you're going to see that they also can play on potato PCs. Well, let's look at Ratchet and Clank. It's not hard to basically go. You're going to see that the Ratchet and Clank thing that, PlayStation was over there talking about needing to be done by the power of the PS5, you get a GTX 960, and that's the minimum requirement, or a 2060 for the recommended requirements. They're not going to isolate the big portion of PC gamers because it's going to affect their sales. Let's look at Returnal. It's very interesting. You really got to take a look at this stuff. Returnal is also requiring that you use a 1060. That seems to be firing a lot more in terms of VFX, which is also underneath the 3060, underneath a lot of this, or quite similar to like the 1650. Or you get yourself an RTX 2070 or 6700 XT. So once again, I think a lot of this is coming from a place where we need to basically talk about this in a way that, a lot of folk can get educated. This person said to me that Ratchet & Clank recommended specs for 14,440. I know they mean 1440, but I'm being petty. It's 3060 Ti and medium settings on a game that released, what was this? 3 years ago. You're really saying nonsense, mate. How am I saying nonsense? I'm literally citing Nixxes and freaking SSR, not Nixxes. I'm freaking citing House Marquee. And then in the other case of Ratchet & Clank, Nixxes and Insomniac. How am I saying nonsense? What have I done? What have I done to deserve this madness? So I go ahead and I say, okay, Ratchet & Clank, go to the Steam page. But then they went to the point of saying the minimum setting 720/30 is bad. You can find this and all that. And the whole thing just went to a very weird place where this person basically started saying that it's not necessarily the minimum requirements, but what the console manufacturers had touted to be the minimum requirements. And I just had to hold my head and say, what in the world is this headache? Why can't we just have conversations using the data right in front of us? What happened to reason, logic, evidence, data, and everything that is there in front of us? That we can't have a conversation based on that, yet somebody has to cry wolf because their feelings got hurt because they weren't prepared to basically make an argument about something. And these are not opinions anyways. You know, I've seen a lot of people chalk this up to, well, it's just my opinion. No, it's not. What it is just misinformation, because you can't just opine into something that literally the data is contrary to. It's what's called being, wrong. And so in order for us to basically be able to try our best to stay accurate, this is why we go to guidelines like this. This is stuff that really affects people's purchasing decisions when they're playing on PC. So what I think is a lot of console players, you're new to this whole PC conversation, and that's fine. I just want to say maybe a little bit of, taking the time to look at what this is about and look at what the platform has to offer and look at what the platform is about might be really helpful, to you. Because if you don't do that, what's going to happen is you're going to make, you're going to get the Donkey of the Day award. And I hate for that to happen. I'm a YouTuber, so my goal is to try to basically go ahead and inform people. And we'll take the information that we see from, the sources that we get them from. If we're speculating, we say we're speculating. But what's there to speculate when the developers of the game are telling you that this is basically what we've done and tested internally? Man, I'm going to keep on keeping on, though. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.